76 ringgit. For households earning under 2,000 ringgit a month, that is the amount left over after paying for everyday goods like food, rent, and petrol. In contrast, the top 20% richest households saw their average monthly earnings hit 16,000 ringgit in 2016. These households spend about 45% of their income on everyday goods and have over 8,000 ringgit left over. So yeah, there's a huge gap, but it's becoming a chasm. According to Bank Negara, in order to have a decent life free of financial worries, the average unmarried person living in Kuala Lumpur should be earning a minimum of 2,700 ringgit a month. For a married couple with 2 children, that figure goes up to 6,500 ringgit. This is called living wages. But a living wage looks like a pipe dream, even in Kuala Lumpur, where more than 50% of working adults earn less than 2,500 ringgit. And this is the state with the highest median household monthly income. But that's just one part of the problem. The real issue? The growing chasm between the richest and poorest Malaysians. Our society is divided into 3 categories based on monthly household income. The top 20%, or T20, middle 40%, and bottom 40%. According to a recent report by the Khazanah Research Institute, the gap between Malaysia's bottom 40 and T20 segments has doubled between 1995 and 2016. In 1995, the T20 households earned around 9,000 ringgit a month, and the B40, 1,000. That's an 8,000 difference. By 2016, T20 households earned around 16,000 ringgit a month, and B40s, 2,000. That's a 14,000 ringgit difference, almost double from 2 decades ago.
The main reason why the income gap doubled is the failure of the past government to recognize relative poverty as a social problem. There has been this steep decline in absolute poverty, but what was neglected was the fact that there has been this sharp increase in income between the rich and the poor.
Although the previous government reported that hardcore poverty had dropped to 0.4%, relative poverty, which is defined as earning less than 60% of the national median income, has increased by more than 50% to 3 million households since 1995. 3 million of our 7.5 million households? That's 40% of us. We aren't the only ones to suffer from rising inequality. It's happening in so many other countries that international bodies are doing studies on the problem and how it could lead to a host of other issues. A study by the World Bank linked inequality to rising crime rates, for one. It's also bad for the economy. This study by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development reported that inequality caused the United States and other wealthy countries' cumulative GDP per capita to be knocked down by 5%. That means less wealth for all.
No country should allow inequality to persist for too long. Inequality can hurt the economy in the long run by creating social tensions, discontentment, distress, and that can undermine the political system, create instability in the economy as well as in the society.
So that was a slightly horrifying glimpse into the crystal ball for Malaysia, if we don't start narrowing the gap soon. But how did we end up in this situation in the first place? Quick history lesson. Back in 1983, Malaysia embarked on a neoliberal economic policy, which prizes economic efficiency above all things. Under this policy, the government would theoretically be able to take a step back and allow free market economics to control how wealth is distributed. Essentially, this policy encouraged the rich to be innovative and start businesses that would create jobs. The catchphrase, trickle-down economics, may be familiar to you. That's not the problem, but this is where the story gets sad.
Relying on the market is good for the economy in the sense that it boosts productivity. This on its own is not a problem unless you have in place mechanisms to redistribute wealth. So in the absence of such mechanism, neoliberal policies can increase inequality while also boosting the economic growth rate. And that is where something is missing in Malaysia. That we hear about various programs of the government, schemes such as BRIM, and yet we find that Malaysia's income distribution remains very insensitive. So it raises a big question Where is the money going?
To be fair, our economic policy isn't the only thing that has contributed to inequality. The Khazanah report also pointed to education as a factor. Simply put, the opportunities and skills a kid in a rural area gets might not be the same as the one who lives in an upscale area and attends private school. And there have been government attempts at closing this gap, and that includes the implementation of a minimum wage in 2012. It worked, in a way. While yes, a higher minimum wage has helped the B40's earnings grow at a rate that is faster than the growth of average income level, we have to remember that while the B40's were climbing the pay scale, T20's were earning a great deal more for a great deal longer. In order for true equality to be reached, the B40's pay would have to continue climbing at this rate for a couple of decades more. In the meantime, maybe it's time to make a new effort to address these income inequalities, and maybe we could start by addressing the education inequalities in the country.
Children from the lower segment of the socioeconomic distribution perform disproportionately poorly in mathematics, science, and reading compared to children who come from well-off background. So unless Malaysia addresses inequality within the education system, simply increasing access to education is not going to close the large gaps in income that we see today in the society.
At the end of the day, something we need to ask ourselves as a nation is this: what do we want to achieve? What kind of country do we want to have for ourselves and our children in the future? Having a clear objective could go a long way towards formulating the kinds of policies we need.
Ultimately, what sort of policies you choose depends on the underlying social objective. There are various scholars that define development not just in terms of freedom or income, but in terms of demand decency. And that need not be about money. So Malaysia today stands at a point where this discussion is very pertinent.
Hey guys, NEWSFLASH is where we discuss and dissect current issues of today. So, what do you think about the income inequality in Malaysia? Let us know in the comment section and look out for our next episode.